Welcome back. This is segment 29. It's about drama. The term may surprise you. It's not drama quite like a typical play, but essentially similar, about people mounting roles, a little bit like personas in a way. I first got onto this with people who studied the work of Steve Karpman. Put out a paper, kind of a strange paper actually, in 1968. And what he talked about is the way we typically assume roles. And he was interested in the drama triangle, where there's a victim being harassed by what he called a persecutor, and then another person who takes the rescuer. And what he's talking about is when we enter these spaces, we have a propensity to pick up and act out one of these roles irrespective of what's legitimately happening. And the drama is in all the energy around this that's the sort of pathological piece of this whole thing. Now, in exploring this with the 4D system, of course, we find some new discoveries. The 4D system teaches us there's a fourth state that Karpman never thought about. He was more interested, I think, in family psychology, that kind of thing. So anyway, the rationalizer is the fourth drama state, and here are the others. And I just changed the name of persecutor to blamer because it's much better fit to what happens in businesses. And of course, what we're measuring with the assessments is blaming and complaining. When you take it out, you get a context of where energy is appropriately directed. And the rest of these all misdirect energy, as I'll show you. In our organizing system, here we are. Now here's the bad news. We've spent a lot of time getting here. We've learned to appreciate, stress shared interests, keep agreements, include, surface reality, address it from a mindset of optimism, be 100% committed. All this is completely useless if you're habituated to go into drama. So the four ways we mount the stage: the victim. The victim says there's nothing I can do, so they do nothing. So the energy of the victim is completely taken away. They're rendered helpless by their own choice in this regard, their own unconscious choice. The rescuer brings energy in, but they misuse it. They let people use them because people learn how we function, right? And so go see a rescuer and ask them to do something because they have high approval needs. I want you to see how each of these tag up with the innate personality. That they're relational, high approval needs. They want to be liked. And in that moment, they'll say, sure. And then after you're gone and they have time to think about it, they realize they already overworked, should never have done it, and they regret taking the work on. The rationalizer tries to get rid of uncomfortable emotions, and we've talked a lot about how to learn to feel your feelings. By running the storyline, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. So in a way, they remove their capacity to act as well. And the blamer, in some sense, is the most interesting, because as I'll show you, in the blamer state, the blamer says it's your fault when in fact it's their own. In fact, without unacknowledged things that they've done themselves, the blamer state is not likely to energize. If we play a little, find post-it notes on your table. You know, if a team is, if I'm not really pretty sure they're in a good solid place, I won't run the exercise this way. I'll just have them, I'll use the excuse that time's short, and I'll run the exercise by having them popcorn these up and write them on a flip chart. A team's in a good place. This exercise is instead kind of fun. And so they get the post-it notes, they write it. The second chair will collect them and put them up in front of the room, and I'll read them, and we'll all get a laugh out of them. You want to write a short note with like a noun and a verb, as in, my boss doesn't listen to me. That's a good prototypical one. And for those of you that never complain, well, write the complaints of someone you know. I think you're going to find, as I do, that we all easily generate complaints, especially with a little encouragement and a little humor like we're talking about here. I want to talk about the state that is the antithesis of all these other states, which is the state of responsibility, which means the state of being able to respond. Here's a statement by a popular writer, Scott Peck. We try to avoid responsibility for our own behavior by assigning our responsibility to some other entity. But this means we give our power to that entity. So I have a $20 bill by now sitting on the projection table or someplace up near the front with me. And I say, who's responsible for the $20 bill being on the table? And the audience will come up with various things, typically I call chain of events reasons. They have, you because you put it there, or the person that farmed the cotton, the U.S. dollar is mostly cotton, or the mint that made it, on and on and on. So when this dies out, I ask, when does responsibility begin? Cycle back. Who's responsible for the $20 bill being on the table? Do this for a little while. I'm trying to create a little bit of an SCE. I'm trying to make you a little angry with me because you'll remember this better. A little bit of frustration, which is a nice word for anger. Then when that dies out, I say, responsibility begins when we take it. Who's responsible for the $20 bill being on the table? Oh, by the way, before I start this, I ask if anyone who's been in a workshop with me before, who's read this part of the book, please let this play out over several minutes. Do not spoil this for the people that are still going to have to ponder it, and sort of watch what happens in the room. You learn a lot more by just waiting for people who don't know what's going on to figure it out. So this goes on and on for a while, and I'll keep saying the same thing, and then someone will say, well, we're all responsible because none of us have taken it. And that's a wonderful thing for someone to say, so I'll point out momentarily. Then finally somebody will come out and take the $20 bill. And when they do that, I give them the money and say it's yours to keep. Responsibility has its payments. Now, somebody who said, we're all responsible, I said, I want you to notice what action occurs or what lack of action occurs when we say we're all responsible. Because in this state, nothing occurs. The responsibility starts when you as an individual decide to take action. And this is the first great lesson of this exercise. The second is I now will bring my hand over and bring attention to the complaints on the flip charts. And I ask, who's responsible for these complaints? And the answer is whoever put it there. And so responsibility for anything begins when you decide to take responsibility, and we'll talk about what to do with complaints. I'm going to tell you about an exercise I used to run in my workshops. It's just easier to talk about it. I'd go around the room and I ask everybody to hand me in sequence $5, and most people would. Some people argue with me. And then if it's the government workers, I'd ask for $1. I found out not all government workers had $5 in their pocket. And most people would give it to me, and I'd put it on the wall with a stick pin and leave it and continue the workshop. So after a while, somebody'd say, well, wait a minute, what are you going to do with our money? And I say, I haven't decided. And then I just go on to the workshop. And then after a while, someone get itchy about it and say, we want to know what you're going to do with our money. And I said, I have not decided what I'm going to do with your money yet. I'm not sure. Then someone will say, well, we want it back. And I say, well, you can get it back if you do two things. The first thing is I want you to tell me why you gave it to me. And someone will say, well, because we trust you. And I say, oh, really? I said, that's really interesting. So what happened here is you're sitting around the room and you had this sudden burst of trust. And in that big burst of trust, you opened your wallet and ran up and handed me money. I said, no, that's not what happened. What happened is you asked for it. I said, that's right. Now, what do you have to do to get it back? And they said, ask you for it. And I said, exactly. What I'm trying to teach you here is the incredible power of making requests. If you learn to do only two things out of our time together, the first would be to express appreciation. The second would be to make requests when you want something. This is incredibly powerful stuff. So how can you never complain again? What you need to do is formulate your complaints into a four-dimensional request. I read one of Stephen Covey's books, and he's talking about a boss that comes in and says, I've got some more work I need you to do. And the guy said, well, let me show you what I'm already doing. You can tell me what to stop. I can tell you that would never work with anybody that I work for. That would be a power struggle. And we remember Charlie's 2 rules, right? First, avoid power struggles, and second, never power struggle when you don't have the power. So instead you make a four-dimensional request. So let's take the example, and I could do any of yours for you. My boss doesn't listen to me. If you walk into his office with the Covey approach and say, you don't listen to me and I'm tired of it. If you don't start listening to me, I'm going to blah, blah, blah. Well, you're now in a power struggle, and remember the two rules. So instead, you make a four-dimensional request. And so the message here is that you want to never complain again. And the methodology is for every complaint that you put up on that board, on that Post-it, you either turn it into a request or forget about it. So you go and see the boss and say, hey, boss, I really like working for you. You're probably one of the most energetic and thoughtful people that I've ever had the pleasure to work with. And I think it would be in both of our interests if you and I could learn to communicate a little more effectively. I could serve you better, and you could get me doing what you want. And what I'd like to talk about is how we can work together. And so when you have work for me to do, or when I'm not feeling heard by you, I can find a way to communicate with you and understand what you want and let you appreciate my integrity and my commitment to honesty. Here's the reality that if I can't communicate with you, I can't do what you want. And I'm thinking that we could have a little process to do this better, and then I can perform in your eyes much more effectively, which would serve both of our interests. And so I'd like to know would you be willing to set up a time with me, say Monday morning at 10 o'clock, and we could talk 15 minutes and a nice dialogue about the work and what's going on. Or I'm making this up, obviously. I'm trying to show you a structure for doing this, and that one was a little tad ragged because I'm recording. But you play with this, you can always do this. And here's what's really interesting about requests. Once I got this, I started to ask people for things, and the returns I got were incredible. And the reason is there's a psychology under this, that when we grant requests, we think someone's going to return the favor. It's called psychologically reciprocity, and this is why it works. Another thing that really helps is if you can put some glad group into the picture. People don't want to spoil the mood, and they're even more likely to give you what you want. One caveat to this: don't ask someone for something they can't give you. So, for example, I don't use this to go and ask for an upgrade to first class at the gate for the airline. The gate person can't do it. But at the Marriott, can I use this to get a suite instead of a regular room? You bet. By the way, if you ask for someone for something they don't want, you just make them frustrated, which again is a nice word for angry. Here's the bottom line of all this: turn your complaints into requests or forget about them. So I don't usually do this, but you could have someone go up and pull their complaint back down or write it again and practice this. I don't usually do it, but you sure could if you wanted. Now, I want to show you how I think these things develop. I think they all start with an emotion. Emotions are, as we've talked about so many times, incredibly powerful. And I think the victim starts with a cellular emotion of helplessness. They feel helpless, and they run a storyline to help themselves feel better. And the storyline is, it's being done to me, there's nothing I can do. The sad feels a little better. If there's nothing I can do, then it's not my fault. The situation is not going the way it should. Here's the other thing: the victims need clubs. And so if you want to keep victims out of your team, all you've got to do is refuse to join clubs because they need them. And life-habituated victims will go work someplace else if they can't get people to play Ain't It Awful with them. The victims, the club members' validation, you say, boy, that boss doesn't listen to anybody, and your club will say, yeah, sure, don't listen to me, that guy's just a jerk, he doesn't blah, blah, blah. So there you are. End up what I call BMC, bitch, moan, and complain. Why would anyone live in this state? What's the benefit? Well, you eliminate the need for action. Helplessness is okay, and it feels pretty good when you get the club members on board. The cost: no power, no action, no outcome. When you're in this state, all your requests will sound like whining. You got to constantly recruit your club. So that's the victim's basic dynamic. This is a wonderful video. It's called Joe versus the Volcano, and it has two separate pieces we're going to see. The first is, this is Joe, and the boss comes in and abuses him, and he talks about feeling lousy. There's two things to see about this. One is the victim and the blamer dancing with each other, And once this gets set up, it'll go on and on and on. And the fact that feeling lousy is a great indicator of being in a drama state. In fact, if you feel lousy, I think the first thing to say is, what's my drama state? And if you feel good, you're probably not. So that's the first part of the video. In the second part, it turns out he's gone to this island. He's been tricked by this lady's father, Patricia, to go to this island and jump into the volcano so that the island will continue to produce some mineral that her father wants. Turns out they jump in and they are saved. They get blown out. Another part of the movie, the father gives him a lot of upfront money to buy things with, to get him to jump in the volcano, and he goes and buys these fancy steamer trunks. Well, they're out in the ocean. The steamer trunks mysteriously come up, and they're on the raft, and he starts telling Patricia about his brain cloud, this supposed terminal illness he has. And in the process, she discovers it was all her father's trick, and he's fine. So he says, I'm saved, I'm saved. And then you watch a little more. Then he goes, but? And he goes back into his victim, and Patricia ends the piece with, and I love this, it will always be something with you, won't it, Joe? So watch the films and see if you don't like them. How do you get out of this? Well, the first thing you ask, do you want more of this? And no reasonable person would. And I see we're entering segment 30, so we'll stop here and continue in a few minutes. Thank you for listening, and see you with the next segment soon. Bye-bye.